Hi, Creative Katie Karen Burchill here. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to create with less. We seem to think that we need to do multiple techniques and use every supply in our arsenal, and that's simply not true. Today we're going to create using one napkin, one stencil, one stamp, and a limited color. We're going to use this napkin. It's called Sunny Flowers from NinnysNapkins, and it has two different orientations. When you open it up, you can see that. So I rough cut it around, and you see me doing that, and then I decide I'm just going to peel off the layers and I'm going to water cut it. Now I chose this napkin. I love the colors on it, and that's going to point me in the direction of what I want to do with it. Now I'm water cutting, I'm editing some of the elements from the napkin out. I don't want this to cover my 6x7 substrate that I'm creating on. I'm working on a 6x7 mixed media board, but this could be done in an art journal page. And if you had a bigger page, you might do a few more things in the background. Now I'm cutting off these leaves. I can always glue them back in place, or I can glue them somewhere else if I so choose. Now the other reason that I'm water cutting here is that I want to have this deckled edge. That disappears. So you don't see the harsh line of where the napkin meets the mixed media board. So this is taking up a good half of my substrate. So there's no need to do so many things on the rest of where the background is going to go. So I'm editing my choices, and I've selected this wheat stock stencil from the Crafter's Workshop. I think this goes along with the fall theme, and I want to add some texture, and I'm going to add texture using modeling paste through this stencil. So I'm taping down the stencil just to hedge my bets and make sure that it doesn't move on me. Now the napkin I'm placing where it's going to be, and those extra plies that I peeled off, I'm leaving them there, and that's going to mask off that area. So I'm not going to get any modeling paste where I'm going to put flowers. I'm using the Crafter's Workshop white modeling paste, and I'm applying it with a key card. I'm just putting a nice layer through the stencil, going right on top of that, layers of napkin. And that napkin layer is it's like acting like a mask and keeping the modeling paste from being under where I'm going to glue the napkin down. Now I somehow got black paint on there, but don't worry, I end up just putting some gesso on it and it disappears. So there's the napkin, and you can see where the modeling paste is. Whenever you use modeling paste or gesso through a stencil, you want to stop, spray it with the Murphy's oil soap, and clean the stencil. Now I'm ready to colorize my background, and I'm going very light and very neutral. I'm using unbleached titanium with white gesso, and I'm applying it with a makeup sponge. And this is giving some variation in tone, which always adds interest in the background. But it's a very simple way to add interest without overcomplicating the background. I want the napkin and the textured stenciling to be the showstopper on this page mixed media board. So I'm positioning this once it's dry. Now I just want to add a little bit more color, and I want to bring out the texture. So I'm taking Naples yellow on a Ranger blending foam and rubbing it primarily on top of where the texture is, and this is really bringing out the texture. You can see those wheat stalks, and that color, Naples yellow, really matches the fall autumnal colors of the napkin, especially that one sunflower. And I'm adding a little yellow around, adding interest, but I'm using that very limited color scheme. I want to add a little bit of black to the background, and I've chosen a small scale script stamp, and I'm putting it in a few select places. I'm using archival ink because it's permanent when dry. It's not going to smear. And I don't want any really underneath where the napkin is. This is adding very subtle patterning. So I'm just positioning the napkin, and I'm grabbing a piece of saran wrap because I'm going to use that to help get out any of the wrinkles. And I'm putting some fluid matte medium from Liquitex underneath the napkin. Then I'm lowering the napkin, and I'm going to use the saran wrap to flatten it. This is a way, it provides less friction on the napkin, and you're less likely to rip the napkin. Then I'm putting the matte medium on top, and then I'm doing the same to the other side of the napkin. If you haven't tried that saran wrap technique, give it a try. I think you'll be amazed at how it works. You just want to not put any of the adhesive on the top until after you smooth out the wrinkles. Now, as with most cases, the colors of the napkin, once you glue them down, they often become bolder, and that's true here. I'm sealing the napkin and turning it into a non-porous surface. I'm going to make sure this is perfectly dry before I move on to the next step. So there were some whiter areas down below. I didn't have a dark enough background, so I'm just taking some of that Naples yellow and unbleached titanium and just smudging it on this to get rid of that whiteness, if you will. I just don't want that to stand out. I'm just using a small brush to do that. Now I am over painting some of the flowers, some of the napkin. Now you could skip this step if you want, but I love adding gesso, which is what's on my brush, and that adds texture to the flowers or whatever you're over painting. And it's making it more your own. So it looks like you've actually painted these flowers on as opposed to just decoupaged the napkin on. Once that's dry, I am now coming back and I'm colorizing on top of the gesso. And I'm using a combination of my Inktense blocks, matching the colors to the colors that were in the napkin or tweaking the colors, changing them up a little bit, and acrylic paints. There's no problem in mixing those things. If you don't have the right color in blocks, you can use your acrylic paints and vice versa. So I'm just adding some of those yellows and oranges and reds back in. But now I have extra texture because I've put some gesso. And here I'm adding some oranges and reds and building up the colors. And yes, some of the colors of those I'm changing, but that's part of making it my own. And you just keep doing this process, adding different colors till you get the color that you're happy with. If you really want to duplicate what's in the napkin, you can look at the napkin. You've got 3 other sections of it to follow if you want. But no one's going to see the napkin next to it. So I've swatched out my Inktense blocks, and then I'm just kind of matching the colors. I'm looking for the closest match. And adding gesso, and then coming in with the Inktense blocks and or acrylic paints and colorizing it, which is adding texture and color to my focal image. So now I'm going to do the same with this red flower. Now this red flower, it gave me a bit of a run for my money, I have to admit. Because when you add the gesso in there, if you don't completely let it dry, the color wasn't exactly right. So I just had to keep tweaking it till I got there, and I did. I'm adding some gesso here to add texture to the center of the flower, so it's not lying flat. I'm adding some blue, a little bit of blue. I'm going to keep going and tweaking that color, making it texturized and interesting. Adding red to the berries and smudging this. Now, when you're over painting, you can do parts of it, and those are going to be texturized, then the other parts are going to not be texturized, and sometimes that adds interest. Now I'm coming in with more red, more black. Always let it dry in between. When I get into trouble, I typically don't allow the dry time. So here I'm colorizing this daisy. And you can see it's a little more pink than it was red or burnt orange-ish red that I really liked initially. So it doesn't quite work, but I'm not done. I always take it as a challenge to overpaint and make it work out. So I'm adding a little bit of black to darken the color. Turn it less pink and more red. And then using my heat tool to dry. And then I come in with some orange, more orange toned Inktense, and that was just the right combination. Now you might be looking at that flower saying, well, you lost all the formation of it. But don't worry, I'm going to add that back in. Here's the center of it. I'm looking at the napkin and just adding to it. And then I always know I'm going to do some shading, and the shading is going to give the definition to the petals that you might be thinking that I've lost. Now the leaves, I'm not adding gesso to the leaves. I'm just adding a wash of Inktense block color. And I never use just one green on the leaves. I might mix the green with a yellow, with an orange, and you get those variations, and that makes it interesting. Now I'm adding some red to add some interest to this daisy-like flower. It was kind of at this point where I realized, okay, I've saved it. There was a moment that, I fully admit that was like, oh, yikes. Can I save this? I'm adding gesso to elongate the petals of this flower, then coming in with the color. Now I'm using the Inktense blocks and using my angle brush and doing some shading. Someone recently asked me, can you use your Inktense blocks for shading? And yes, you can. I do have a series of using Inktense blocks in mixed media. You may want to check that out if it's a product that you have or you're interested in getting. It is one of my very, very first videos, so I apologize for the quality, but the information is still very valid. Now I'm coming in with shading black on the flowers, the two flowers, and some of the leaves as well. And it's a bit of dance. You're putting in some color, you're taking it off. Doing a little bit of stippling. And adding more shading on here, that little bit of black. And I'm not putting it on every petal, I'm just putting it on a select few. So now I want to bring out that texture, that modeling paste texture that we put through the stencil. And instead, I'm going up a tone, and I am using yellow oxide, and I'm adding some brown to it. Just adding a little bit of brown. I want it a little bit darker. I want those wheat stalks to stand out. So I'm going very lightly over top. And you can see how the texture, the pattern of the wheat stalks is starting to come out. Thinking, okay, I can go darker. So I'm building up the color. And so now I'm adding pretty much straight brown on top to make those wheat stalks stand out even more. Be part of the focal image. I do go in with a very little bit of black at the end, and that didn't get caught on camera. But I put it only in a few areas. You want an ever so light touch, but those blending foams from Ranger are perfect for this. Then I'm adding a little bit of the brown around the outside. I do end up adding a little bit of black as well. And again, I'm just building up the color. You do a little bit, check it out. Is it good enough? Are you done? And framing it. Now this mixed media piece, I am going to put it into a display frame, but since it's on this mixed media board from the Crafter's Workshop, I can just have this leaning on a ledge or on a plate rack. Oh, here I think I did catch putting that black, just adding just a little bit. I don't go all over the wheat, but just a few select areas, and then around the outside edge. And of course, I want to add some gold to this, add some bling, and it goes perfectly with these fall colors, color palette that I kept with. And because this is on a mixed media board, I will be giving this a coat of Minwax polyacrylic satin varnish once it's completely dry. And that'll make the colors shine a little bit more and protect the art. If this wasn't an art journal page, I wouldn't varnish it at all. I typically don't. And on this page, canvas, mixed media board, I did something that I rarely do. I did not put on a sentiment. Now here's my display easel, and this mixed media board has been cut perfectly to fit in this easel, and I'll link to the video where I show how I transformed a Dollarama purchase into this display easel. I love how the black just really frames this artwork and really just makes it sing. So, from one stencil, one napkin, and one script stamp, we have a beautiful piece of mixed media art. So challenge yourself to create with less.